But just when it came to God, I was like, okay, yeah, there has to be a God. But then there's a lot of days where I was like, we're all alone out here. Like, I'm deceiving myself. You know what I mean? And I think that's the component you need to understand in order to get past a lot of this stuff.
So how old were you when you started being promiscuous?
Yeah, so I remember the first week I lost my virginity, I slept with two different girls in that same week. And when I came across that, I was like, whoa, there's actually evidence here. Then I started thinking about it more, studying it more. And then I was like, I just believe this is
Ruslan.
All right, so I am here with someone that I consider a friend, and I've definitely been enjoying his company for the past couple of days, and wanted to get more into his story, which I don't know if I've ever heard your story, but without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we have Mr. Jon McCray, aka What Do You Mean?
What up, man? Good to see you, bro.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to talk to you. So I did not know really anything about your testimony. I knew you did music. I know you did, obviously, you do YouTube. Nashville, Colorado. I just found out you lived in LA for a while.
Yeah.
So I didn't really know a whole lot about your story. So let's start just beginning. Where did you grow up? You know, father, mother, siblings. Take us to the beginning.
Yeah, just so I grew up in Colorado, in Aurora, Colorado. Got an identical twin brother, an older brother. My mom and dad divorced officially when I was 15, but they were kind of separated, you know, for a while before then.
Yeah.
Didn't grow up in a church-going home, Christian home, nothing like that. Never really even talked about anything religious or anything like that growing up, aside from a casual God has this or something like that. Really kind of vague, but nothing like serious or in depth or even nothing theological.
So no grandma, no one ever. No church, never.
No church until my aunt, though. My aunt was the only one who was Christian, and so she first introduced me to the church when I was 15. But the church she introduced me to, and me and my twin went to for a while, it turned out it was kind of like it's really kind of super charismatic, but really kind of cultish kind of church too.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, so we went there for about a year. It's my first introduction to Christianity. And then me and my twin were like, we're kind of done with this stuff. And so after that, I think both of us went kind of more agnostic, kind of progressively went kind of more agnostic again. And he kept going down that route. And I eventually, in college, I ended up taking a philosophy of religion course. And in philosophy of religion, I learned the arguments for God's existence. And I said, oh, okay, this is actually logical. You know what I mean? And so once I came across the arguments for God's existence and stuff, I found them compelling. And then eventually down the road, I came across the arguments for the resurrection and then ended up converting to Christianity. And then, and just got more and more serious with it after that.
Yeah. So were you close to your dad, your mom? Like, what was that dynamic like?
I was always a little bit more close with my mom, but my mom was kind of going through a lot too during that divorce time. My dad was gone a lot throughout our childhood. You know what I mean? My dad's a cool dad. You know what I mean? But he was he also wrestled with drugs too. So he was gone a lot. You know what I mean? Going on like drug binges and stuff like that. You know. But he also was traveling a lot for work. And so he wasn't around a ton when I was younger, you know what I mean? But then my mom was going through stuff and during these divorce years, and she kind of checked out. So like I moved out at 16, never went back home.
Whoa, you moved out at 16.
Yeah.
So 15, you go to this hyper charismatic church. And then 16, you move out.
Yeah.
Now, do you think in hindsight, the charismatic church, like, did you think you got saved there initially, or was it completely false gospel?
Well, see, that's kind of the question, right? It's like, did I believe at that point, kind of like in my mind? I'd say yeah, because I was baptized too. But then after, like, I realized I was like, I don't believe hardly any of this stuff that I was taught. You see what I'm saying? So it's kind of like, when it comes to like a simple just placing your trust in Jesus, then I think I did at that point, but I don't think I really understood the fullness of the gospel. You know what I mean? And so my story's not as linear as a lot of people. Like a lot of people have this moment where it's just like, boom, you know what I mean? And my story's not really like that.
Yeah, they wrote it down, the date they got saved, they put it in their Bible, they remember, the moment, the feeling, the song that was playing. Yeah, mine isn't like that either. I mean, I got christened in the Armenian Apostolic Church when I was like 7 or 8 years old. And then 10, 11 was like full on like, I'm an atheist.
Oh, yeah.
And then started going to a seeker church, like 15.
Yeah.
But I feel like didn't really surrender everything to Jesus until like 17.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So similar. So I don't remember the moment. I remember the moment where I was done trying to have one foot in, one foot out. I remember that moment.
Yeah.
It was the end of my junior year, but I don't remember like the first time I put my hand up or the first time I said, "Yeah, I believe in you." It could have been as early as a kid. To you know, those first couple times I was at a mega church.
See, well, I will say that I do remember after I got baptized that I remember the world looked physically different to me. Like colors were brighter.
Wow.
Like I had that kind of overwhelming kind of sense of peace.
Oh, wow.
So that's why I believe that I was probably saved at that point. But I mean, it's kind of hard to kind of say just because, you know what I mean? It's like, what did I actually believe? You know what I mean? That was so long ago now. It's kind of hard for me to remember. But I remember too then just reading through like the New Testament, you know what I mean? So I took it kind of serious, you know, but I kind of went that kind of extreme. And then after that church was so wild, you know what I mean? Then I was like, do I even believe this anymore? You know what I mean? Like it was kind of weird. I was like, I don't know. So I didn't even know there were intellectual reasons to embrace Christianity until college. And then it was at that point where I was like, okay, I'm convinced intellectually about the arguments for God's existence. But I didn't know if God was revealed in any of these other religions or not. And so what I would do is I went to all these different churches. I went to all these different churches and was asking people, I said, why do you think that your beliefs are true? Because I knew enough kind of with philosophy and stuff to know that like everybody can't be right, you know what I mean, if they're mutually exclusive views. So like, why I think your view is true. And what I heard from people over and over was it always give me this kind of coincidences. They're like, oh, I was going through this thing and then everything worked out in this way, you know, where it was like these improbable coincidences and stuff like that. And that would be everybody's story. And then eventually, like when I was prepping to go to these different churches, because I went to like the Church of Scientology, I went to every church I could think of. I was prepping, and I came across evidence online for the evidence for the resurrection online. And when I came across that, I was like, whoa, there's actually evidence here. And then I started thinking about it more, studying it more, and then I was like, I just believe this is true. You know what I mean? So
So when you back up a little bit, when you move out at 16, you gotta unpack that. Like what led up to you moving out at 16?
Well, honestly, like my mom we weren't getting along at that time. You know what I mean? And I think that kind of happens with kids, teenagers and their moms. You know what I mean? And she was like depressed and going through a lot of stuff too with the divorce and stuff. So I was like, I'm ready to be out. And she kind of checked out too because like me and my twin would be gone for like days. You know what I mean? And she's not really like following up because she just checked out mentally. I know it was a tough time for her. So, so I was like, once I got that taste of moving out, I was like, I'm never going back. So I never went back home. I just worked at a place called Bagelicious. I worked at a bagel place.
Bagel place, okay.
That was my first job. And then after that, I started working at a grocery store. And then I started working at restaurants and stuff after that. But I kept on my grind so that way I didn't have to go back home.
Wow. And so were you living with a friend? You had your own place?
A friend that was older. He, I think he was a senior. At that time too, and I think he moved out. I think he was like 17, something like that, or whatever.
So he's a couple years older than you, and are you working a job, sustaining yourself, and finishing high school? Yeah. Wow.
Did it? Yeah. But I mean, rent was so cheap back then too. You know what I mean? So
do you remember what your rent was?
I think it was like $450 or something like that for like. I think it was like everything, if I remember right. It was like super cheap back then. You know what I mean? So
and so that was your half of it.
I think if I remember right, and I could be wrong on this, but if I remember right, I think that was like the total was something like that, like around like $500 or something like that. Yeah. And this was back in
some Denver prices, bro.
This was back in the day, but before Denver popped off too. Yeah. You know what I mean? So
wow. Yeah. Okay. So you move out, you're in high school, and was your mom working full time? I mean, it had to have been hard for her with 3 boys. Yeah. And it's not like your dad was around a whole lot.
That's right. Yeah. So no, my dad was working and my mom was taking care of the house and stuff like that. But then when they went through a divorce, my dad wasn't like trying to give up money. You know what I mean? So it was bad because then my mom she was trying to figure out with money and stuff. And so it was a sloppy situation.
How old were you when they got divorced?
Officially, when they officially got divorced, I was 15.
But when they separated?
Separated, yeah. A couple years before that, they were. But my dad was gone so much, to be honest. It was kind of like, I remember I was sad when I was a kid about it, but then you kind of get used to it. You know what I mean? I was like, okay, Dad's going to be gone again because he'd be traveling a lot for work. And then sometimes he'd just be like missing. You know what I mean? A few days on like binges and stuff. So.
Jeez, man.
Yeah, but he's better now, though. So like we got a cool relationship and all that, too. So that's good. So.
Yeah. Praise God that he's better now.
Yeah.
Do you think that your dad not being around at such a pivotal time, 12 to 15, had a impact in you, kind of, not engaging with your mom and not being, wanting to move out and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, and it's hard to know how much because I don't really know much different. You know what I mean? But I know when I was younger, I always wanted my mom's love more. You know what I mean? And I realized my twin, he always wanted my dad's love more. You know what I mean? So that's interesting. But yeah, I think it did. I'm sure it probably, triggered like a lot of the problems I had with women and stuff. You know what I mean? Growing up and stuff. I'm sure like a lot of this stuff's kind of intertwined. But yeah.
So you were fairly, as I lost my virginity at like 10, 11.
Oh, that's early.
Super early, bro.
Yeah.
Definitely like that verse in Solomon, like do not awaken love before, right?
Yeah.
And I saw porn for the first time at age 5.
Okay, yeah.
On top of like being molested and all kinds of other stuff. So how old were you when you started being promiscuous?
Yeah, so I was 13 when I lost my virginity.
Okay.
And I remember I was introduced to porn at a really young age because my older brother had like a whole bunch of like a massive amount of like magazines and videos and all that me and my twin found when we were younger. You know what I mean? Younger than that, I can't remember.
You don't
what
remember
age.
how long? How
I
young,
don't remember what age, but we were young. You know, it's before I even knew what a woman looked like naked. You know what I mean? So I was pretty young, and I didn't understand it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, so then when I was like 13, lost my virginity, and then from then on, like I had like I was just all about women, like my twin and then like our best friend and stuff at the time. We lived in our neighborhood and stuff. All we'd be thinking about and talking about was women, you know what I mean? And you know what I mean? And trying to hook up with girls and stuff like that. I became obsessed, you know what I mean? So
at 13, you're locked in trying to hook up as often.
Yeah, locked in. And it was like constant, like hooking up with girls since that day. You know what I mean? Since the day that happened. I remember the first week I lost my virginity, I slept with two different girls in that same week. You know what I mean? I remember it was like that were in my neighborhood, 2 different girls in my neighborhood.
Where was your neighborhood, bro? What was going on in the neighborhood?
Oh yeah, it's bad because I was thinking like now it's so weird like how different the world looks, you know. But at that time, like I was like, this is wild, like you know what I mean? Girls do this? Oh okay, you know what I mean? Didn't know what to expect, you know what I mean? And never masturbated, nothing like that too. So this was like my first kind of introduction to it. It's kind of confusing, you know, but then I was just like, okay, you know what I mean? And trying to like feel, because my friends and stuff would be like, yeah, good job, you know what I mean? Or whatever. And so it kind of develops that kind of mindset where you associate that with like masculinity, you know what I mean? And like being a man and success in a sense, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Wow, what a trip. Yeah, so my situation was similar, but like I lost my virginity, but then like didn't talk to really any. I talked to a couple girls here and there, but didn't really date until I got into high school, freshman year of high school. Got with a girl, and was just with one girl.
Oh yeah,
you know, until 17.
I mean, not good for you in the
it wasn't.
You know
good.
what I mean? I'm saying good for you in the sense where you stayed with one girl all that time.
Yeah, and in hindsight, it probably kind of God probably allowed me to be in that situation to kind of. I guess like protect me in a way because there's definitely other girls at the high school that were interested and that, you know, I was also just I was kind of trying to be a Christian, not, you know what I mean? Going to church, but I was also oblivious to a lot of the signs. So they'd be like, can you give me a ride home? Hey, you want to come inside? And I'm like, oh no, I got to go.
You didn't
like,
know what to look for.
You know, I didn't know, you know? And so, but it like kind of like I avoided that, and then I met my wife at 19, and so my wife was like, you know, that was who I was with. So there was some degree of like I didn't wild out, but I definitely wild out with porn, and that also had a negative effect on me in terms of my mentality. At what point we were talking offline? At what point were you kind of exposed to the pickup artist stuff? Because I remember at this point me and my wife were married. I remember there was a show on VH1, and it was like, I think it was a guy named like Destiny or something, and it was like he had this big old hat. And it was this whole like pickup artist show.
I know who you're talking. Mystery, I think. Was
Mystery,
Mystery.
Yes.
Yeah. So the pickup stuff like that came a little bit later. So like for the record, like and I don't really like talk about this stuff because I am kind of ashamed about it, like somewhat, you know what I mean? But I know I'm forgiven in Christ, but I had women consistently since 13 on, you know what I mean? So like, so when I said good for you, I don't mean good for you that you're having premarital sex or whatever, but I'm saying that you had one girl for years. It wasn't like that for me. I had like a lot of different girls for years, and and it's like, you know, I don't like I'm not proud of it or nothing like that, you know what I mean? But anyways, the pickup stuff came kind of later. I remember just like reading like some of those books like Neil Strauss, The Game, and Vin DiCarlo and all this kind of stuff. And then I kind of like lived that life where this was like what I was obsessed about, you know what I mean? Because I have kind of like I get obsessed about things and I really kind of tune in. And so now I'm glad I'm doing it for the Lord, you know what I mean? But
so you're fully immersed.
Fully immersed
in all of that.
Yeah, fully immersed. Yeah, so like, just like lots of different girls every night going out, you know what I mean, to the clubs and stuff and trying to pick up girls and all that stuff, you know. So
you're probably, so a lot of the stuff now from the red pill is like pickup didn't work, it didn't work. And so like you're probably the minority of guys that's like good looking that it worked for. You know, and everybody's like, it didn't work for me. You know, like and they're like sloppy, just unattractive dudes, and it's like, well, it's not gonna work for everybody, bud. You know?
Yeah, because it takes like a degree of like kind of social intelligence and common sense kind of like too, you know. So but I mean, it was bad because I thought like the goal for that, like it's such a different mindset when you're trying to get married. You know what I mean? Like the goal for that was just like, how can you get sexual with these girls as soon as you can, so that way you can get them like pot committed, and then you're in the dominating seat. You know what I mean? So you can decide.
It's a lot of weird like power dynamics and psychological games, and like to me, it always made sense to like, I want to have one woman that I really enjoy and build a life with one woman, because everything else just seemed like a headache. Like it just seemed like this. And then also like if I actually have game, I shouldn't have to play these mind games with girls. Like that also didn't make sense to me, you know?
And I think that's good, you know what I mean? And that's mature. Like I guess like for me, I didn't really have that inclination as much to kind of want to settle down, which is, I mean, I always wanted someone, because I remember like there's a lot of points where I was like, I can't even watch a movie with a girl that I actually like as a person. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just like, I'm just hooking up. And I remember hitting so many points where I was like, I didn't even like, wasn't even in the mood to like sleep with these girls, but I felt like I had to, like, because it was such a habit that I established for years. You know what I mean? So it was like, I just have to, you know what I mean? And it was just weird. It was like, felt like I was a slave to like some imaginary, you know, standard that I had to hold up to for like just to hook up with these different women. You know what I mean? And then I remember just thinking too, like, if I had this amount of women, these different body types, these different ethnicities, and all this other stuff like that, I was like, then I'll be finally
Did you
cool.
have like one of them Excel sheets like you have for your YouTube analytics?
No.
For women?
No, I wasn't keeping track like that.
This man like, okay, I hate that. Now I got to. That's a trip. Now, when you had that first exposure to the gospel at 15 and you trusted Jesus to some extent, right?
It's hard to say because I don't know exactly at that point. Kind of, I know now, like looking back, like a lot of the stuff they taught was so wonky. You know what I mean? That I wouldn't embrace it now at all. Like most of it, there's a lot of the word of faith type stuff.
Sure.
And, you know what I mean? But really, it was like later on when I actually like really internalized the gospel. That's when things started changing.
But was there any conscious hit initially when you're 15 going for church every year and you're kind of like, like, did you stop for a while?
Yeah, I did.
You did stop for a while? Okay.
I did. I stopped for a little bit. And then I remember like constantly just turning down girls. And then I remember feeling like I was like, man, I've turned down a lot of these opportunities after I messed up and hooked up with a different girl. You know what I mean? Hooked up with a girl from this hiatus I took. Then I was like, I missed out on these opportunities. Now it was all for nothing. And then that mindset made me think, well, now I better just fully indulge. You know what I mean?
Now you're trying to play catch up.
Yeah, trying to play catch up.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it kind of had a bad effect in that sense. You know what I mean? Because I did feel bad, but the Christianity to that first one I was introduced to was super legalistic.
Okay.
And so it kind of backfired for me. You know what I mean?
All those rules, restrictions, don't do this, don't do that, and not a healthy redirection of how to understand and enjoy sexuality.
Like even understanding deeply like what it means for what Jesus did for your life, that still helps a little bit. You know what I mean? But like so it was hard for me because I wasn't meditating on the right things. I was meditating on don't do, and it became this bigger and bigger monster in my head. You know what I mean? Until it was just like the thing was swallowing me up. So,
Man, that's heavy. So you graduate high school, you do a couple years in college, and this is when you take this philosophy class, and that starts the spark again of, was there a point where you kind of closed the door to God and you were like, I don't believe in God, or like, I don't know what I believe, but this ain't it? Like, my experience with Christianity initially is definitely not it. Was it more like that, or was it like, I don't believe in a God?
Well, so it was like a couple things, because like it was a lot of times where I was like, some days I would believe in God because I'd be like, okay, there has to be a God. I'm looking at the stars and stuff, but really I'm like, I don't know anything about Christianity at this point, right? But just when it came to God, I was like, okay, yeah, there has to be a God. But then there's a lot of days where I was like, we're all alone out here. Like, I'm deceiving myself. And I remember having these thoughts when I was even a little kid, when I heard people talking about God, and I remember thinking like, people just made up God just to keep people in line. I remember thinking that to myself. You know what I mean? At a really young age too, just like, it's just to help them keep in line, like Santa Claus and stuff like this. You know what I mean? I thought of it that way. But as I got older too, I was like, yeah, I was like, and my twin, we thought the same thing. We're like, we just kind of deceived ourselves into believing this Christianity thing. You know what I mean? It's just goofy. Like, a man walked on water, you know what I mean? Turned water into wine. Yeah, right. You know what I mean? And so we both were like that. But yeah, so the Christianity closed the door to more. The God stuff, I didn't really care a bunch because I was focused on women and other stuff. But when I went to college and came across like the Kalam cosmological argument was the argument for me that really, like, I spent a lot of time thinking through, reading all the objections, all the sides on it. And I was like, I believe this. This makes sense to me. You know what I mean? And so,
can you break that down for people that aren't familiar with that argument?
Yeah. So it's basically, it's just the first premise is everything that begins to exist has a cause. Second premise is the universe began to exist, and that includes all time, space, and matter. Therefore, the universe had a cause. And then when you look at what could have caused all time, space, and matter, it would have to be something that's timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. And then there's arguments for its personhood, because it's like, if this thing has been around for all of eternity because it is uncaused, it created the first causation. If it's been around for all of eternity, then it couldn't do anything unless it was personal. So that way it can make a personal choice. And so I came to this conclusion. I was like, I wasn't presupposing God. I never liked presuppositional type arguments in the sense, even though we all have presuppositions to some extent, but I never liked those type arguments because it felt like it was backwards reasoning. But this one to me felt like I was like, this makes sense. You know what I mean? And I spent a lot of time looking into cosmology, the science and stuff, looking at the cosmogony, which is the origin of the universe and stuff. I was like, I'm convinced, like, this makes sense to me.
You learned this at a secular school. They're teaching you this at a regular community college in Denver.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but later I found out that my philosophy of religion teacher too was a Christian. I didn't find that out till later, and I went back and took his class a second time later on.
Same class.
Yeah, same class. Yeah, because it was so deep to me. You know what I mean? And so like then after that point, we talked and stuff like that, and I found out he's a Christian, and we still stay in touch to this day. I just saw him a couple years ago too at a conference out in Dallas too. So, but yeah,
what a trip, man. And I'm sure he's probably really pumped on what you're doing now with What Do You Mean and everything.
Yeah. He said he's been watching my stuff and all too, so it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Bro, that's so dope. So, okay, so you kind of, 15, you kind of hear the gospel, kind of put your faith in Jesus, but you're not really sure. Then you're convinced. It sounds like you go from agnostic to theist. Is that fair?
To theist, that's right, yeah.
And then now, when do you go from theist to like Christian theist? Like Christ is God theist?
Yeah, that was so... And this was too kind of more of a kind of gradual process. But this is when that same, after I was saying how I went to all these different churches and stuff, came across the evidence for the resurrection. Then when I took my that class, that philosophy of religion class, the second time, they had us like do these debates on at the end of the semester. You do a debate and you get a position. You just draw a position off the hat and you have to debate that position. And mine was to go against the resurrection. And that's when I really took a deep dive into it.
Whoa, so you have to debate against the resurrection.
Yeah, and so I started taking a deep dive, and I was like, if I grant these premises that all these historians tend to agree on, these like four kind of main premises, I was like, I don't know how to come up with an explanation where this makes sense. You know what I mean? I was like, without it being super ad hoc, which means you're basically coming up with an explanation just to avoid being falsified, your position being falsified. And so, but that's when I really took a deep dive, and that's where I got deeper. And I think it was like at that point too, where I was like starting to kind of really start believing it more. But I worked it out too over years and stuff like this, talking to people about it, debating people about it. You know what I mean? And
so what are those four premises that kind of historians acknowledge that even if you're arguing against the resurrection, you still have to acknowledge those four premises that kind of tripped you up?
Yeah. So if I remember right, it's been so long. But first one is Jesus died by crucifixion on under Pilate. Second one is his followers sincerely believe that he rose from the dead. The first disciples sincerely and genuinely believe that they saw him resurrected from the dead afterwards. The tomb is empty. That's the third. The tomb was found empty. And this one has less of a consensus, but it's about 75% to 80% of scholars agree on that one. And I can't remember. I'm missing one, but I can't remember it right now. But yeah.
Trying to think if because I came through the door of apologetics as well, so I'm trying to think. The tomb's empty. They were convinced. Onto Pilate. What is the other one? Paul? Like the fact that the church started and there was this massive movement after the fact?
Maybe, yeah.
Or is it the martyr? Would they all die for a lie?
Yeah, that was in the same one where they sincerely believed.
They sincerely believed.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay.
But anyways,
I mean, those are three strong, you know, premises that or you got 3 out of 4, I think, right? So, So, how did that debate go?
It was cool too, because like now in hindsight too, like later when I started just soaking up everything I could read, I started realizing people were bringing in like Josh McDowell's books and stuff like this, you know. And this
that's how I came to faith. I'm not sure. If
Josh McDowell.
Josh McDowell, Evidence That Demands a Verdict.
That's funny. Yeah,
I was working at Pizza Hut. I took a break with the Christian girl, started dating a Jehovah's Witness girl. They believe Jesus is the Son of God, not God in the flesh. And I'm like, but I'm still going to the secret church. And my manager and our head delivery driver at the local Pizza Hut I'm working at my sophomore year are Christians. And they both were telling me, like, no, Jesus is God. You're wrong. Like, this is
interesting.
Jesus God. You can just go read the Gospel of John. And I'm like, no, he's not God. Right?
Yeah.
And then they're like, hey, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and brought me the book. And it was like this big old thick book.
One.
The new Evidence That Demands a Verdict.
The new one, that's the bigger one. Yeah.
And that joint was, and then like I got to the part about Jehovah's Witnesses. I got to the part about Mormons. I got to the part about Islam. I was like, this is
hooked.
it. But even after that, even after believing Jesus is God, it was still about a year process till I fully surrendered my life to him.
Yeah. For me, it was longer than that. You know what I mean? It's like that's why it's kind of weird in us. Like I have more kind of compassion and understanding for people who, even though they believe, they're still like wrestling with a lot of stuff. Like I think people who have a radical conversion, they tend to think that this is how it happens for everybody. You know what I mean? Where their whole life changes.
That's good. Yeah.
But it's not that way for a lot of people. You know, and I've seen a lot of people that it has been an instant radical conversion. Other people, you know, get saved when they're wrestling with drug addiction and stuff, still having a hard time battling it and stuff. You know what I mean? And you can stifle the spirit. That's biblical. You know what I mean? So you can stifle the spirit and not grow in the way that you're supposed to grow spiritually. You know what I mean? For ways. And so so for me, it was a longer process as well. So
at what point are you like, okay, I think I'm a Christian now? Or are you always like, now after you deal with the resurrection, are you like, okay, well, I guess I had halfway right when 15 when I was going to that church, and I guess I'm a Christian. Or were you still not like, I'm a Christian? Like, where were you at?
I remember hitting a specific point. So there was 2 points. Like after the philosophy of religion class the first time, I remember thinking the words to myself. I was like, I believe in God now. I just remember saying that in my head. I was like, I believe in God now. You know what I mean? So that was when it was the first time I actually believed in God. When it came to Christianity, I remember spending time too, like reading a lot of stuff and debating atheists and stuff online and stuff, because for me it was kind of probability. I said, I remember hitting a point where I said, if Christianity is not true, nothing's true, because it's the only thing that makes sense of all of the evidence we have. It's the only thing that actually has really good evidence. You know what I mean too? And so, and the only thing that really makes sense of the external world, from the micro level to the macro level, from like the atoms to the stars and the galaxies, also human psychology. Why is it that we have these things like a near universal consensus that you shouldn't murder people or steal stuff and all that, but we still do, you know what I mean? And so we have all of these different things psychologically and stuff. And then, so I took it in the sense where I said, okay, this makes the most sense. So I accepted on that ground, you know what I mean? That it makes just the most sense. So yeah, so that was a certain point I hit. Yeah.
So you get there, you said this makes the most sense. And
by the way, too, just a quick note on that. I genuinely felt like I was open to say if Christianity was not, you know what I mean, not true, I was very okay with that too because I didn't really care. I thought like I was like, then I can just continue to live this wild life and stuff. You know what I mean? So for me, I didn't have a stake in the game. I didn't feel like wanting it to be true, but just being honest with myself, I thought it just made the most sense.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And so speaking of the wild life, where are you at now with girls and women?
Yeah.
And you're doing music now at this point as well. You and your
Yeah,
twin are rapping and singing and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Where are you at in terms of how your life looks? Like,
Yeah.
are you still wild? Are you kind of like,
Yeah.
all right, I gotta chill. There's a God. That means there's some sort of accountability to this.
No,
Like, where are you
yeah.
at with that?
That's good. No, I was still struggling. Just with girls, like I didn't mess with drugs and alcohol. Nothing like that was ever hard for me. Just with women, it was like my kryptonite. You know what I mean? And it was just like I just felt like I couldn't shake it. And I felt like I was gonna just take this to the grave. Like I had on the one hand, I wanted to be a vessel for God, you know what I mean? And I wanted to like let people know about this stuff I found, especially in apologetics, because I didn't even know it existed. You know what I mean? I was like, there's actually good reasons for this. I wanted that. But at the same time, I was always really kind of nervous because I was like, I'm never going to be able to stop hooking up with girls. You know what I mean? It was just like my thing. I just had the hardest time shaking, you know? And then I remember having a lot of times where it's like, even coming off of like, you know, from the first time too, like where I cut, you know, women off or whatever for a while. There's a lot of times I just felt like I just felt full of shame. You know what I mean? Like shame for all of this kind of life. Then I started realizing the world doesn't really care. You can say you're Christian and you can still like, you know, smash a bunch of girls and stuff like that. They don't really care. So then I was like, okay, well, I guess this is kind of normal. You know what I mean? If that's the case, because most like the world doesn't care. They're not hating on you for it. You know what I mean? And so like a lot of people know what it's like to be Christian and messing up all the time. You know what I mean? So like, so then I was like, okay, maybe that's just kind of normal. You know what I mean? And but I still kind of felt like a sense of shame too, and I never like let go all the way. So I was always trying to kind of fight against it a little bit, but then sometimes I'll just give up and just give in. You know what I mean? So
You're saying that the world was okay with a hyper grace version of Christianity.
yeah, I don't know if it's the hyper grace version. Yeah, I guess more so saying that like the license, I guess, to say so like you should just go ahead and kind of do what you want. You know what I mean? Like Cardi B or something like that will like thank God at her thing, but her life's not like she's not trying to live a God honoring life. You see what I'm saying? And so and because I do believe in grace, like grace is deep, you know what I mean? And I think that's the component you need to understand in order to get past a lot of this stuff is knowing the grace counterintuitively.
Yeah, it is counterintuitive, but it's also a beautiful paradox. So you're going through this process of like you're wrestling, there's shame, you're giving in, and so like, are you still full-fledged in the pickup artist, hookup culture, or are you kind of more slowing down as you're becoming more aware of God?
No, not really. I mean, there was times I slowed down, and then times I just got tired of slowing down. You know what I mean? So I would just oscillate between like just wilding out, slowing down a little bit. You know what I mean? Or feeling bad or whatever. And then it's just like it's all I know because I've been doing this my whole life basically.
And
almost.
are you just going to clubs and bars? Are you using apps? Like, what are you doing to meet all these women?
Yeah. So I was going to bars and clubs a lot, like every weekend. I lived in Vegas for a while too. You know,
Well,
what I mean?
that'll do it.
Yeah. But yeah, even apps and stuff like this before like, well, that was even before Tinder days and all that too. Tinder's kind of new, but meeting girls on these apps and stuff like that, meeting girls all the time in my DMs because I was doing music, you know what I mean? And girls would be DMing me all the time, you know what I mean? And I'd be getting comments on stuff and reaching out to girls on like Facebook and stuff like that, you know? So it was just like all my life was about. Like it really, when I say like, that's all I was doing, like a 9 to 5 and not getting paid. That's what I was doing. You know what I mean? So
you had a multi-tiered system for finding women, basically.
I had text message like processes and stuff. You know what I mean?
You had scripts?
Yeah, like just like processes and stuff like that. Yeah, so it was.
So you did have an Excel sheet.
It's like you're doing it so much, you know what I mean? And then it's like a numbers game in my head. So it was like if I pick up 10 numbers tonight or whatever, you know, then. 5 of them will hit me back. 3 of them will come through. You know what I mean, or whatever. So, yeah.
Crazy, bro.
Yeah. It's not not the highlight of my life. But yeah.
And how long does this continue?
Oh, this is going for like most of my adult years. Like, really, honestly, until like before like I met my wife. Like, you know what I mean? Like until about that time. So this is why it's kind of weird because like until that time it was like it was just me struggling in these ways, you know what I mean? And so when I met my wife, that's when things started kind of changing. But really when like everything like really changed for me, like and my heart completely changed towards this, is when I started going through the gospel, trying to really internalize and understand the gospel, the depths of grace. What does this mean? You know what I mean? And going through scriptures, because long story short, like there's a guy who came to a meeting that we were at or whatever, and he was saying like all this stuff. He says, if Hitler believed in Jesus, would he be saved? And he would go around to these places and stuff, keep asking Christians this, and Christians would get kind of caught up because they're like, well, no, he wouldn't be a real Christian. And the guy's like, and the dude was from a Church of Christ background. So he's saying, you need works, and here are the works before salvation that you need, and then after salvation that you need to go into heaven and stuff. And so I started looking into this and started realizing everybody has these different lists of works. Works is like is like people don't need much motivation for works and for legalism. They just don't. Like, they don't need motivation for that. And so, like, I was like, everybody's just arguing about where these works go. And I'm saying, do the works really go in the gospel message? Like, if it's grace, which is a free, undeserved gift, it's a gift. If I give you a gift and then I say, okay, but if you really appreciate the gift, you're going to give me $50. You know what I mean? Is that really me giving you a gift? You know what I mean? And so really internalizing and understanding, which I believe is biblical, this is my conviction, is that I don't think works are necessary component to salvation before or after salvation. I think that you can stifle the spirit. I think the natural mode for the Christian is to do good works, but you can still stifle the spirit. You know what I mean? And so I don't think you judge somebody's salvation based off of their works.
Yeah, that's good. So, but you had a conversation, and with a desire to get help. In this area, right? And then that conversation seems to have kind of unlocked some of what you're describing now.
When at that time it didn't.
It didn't.
It didn't.
Okay.
That's why it was so interesting, because in hindsight, I understand what the guy was saying. But so I did go seek counseling, and I found out after I got there that the guy was a Christian, because I was like, I'm wrestling with this sex addiction. You know what I mean?
And where are you? Where are we on the process when you're like, I need to go get counseling for my sex addiction?
This was during this time too, where I started feeling shame and stuff. I was like, I got to stop this. And when I show up to the guy, he's just like, so why are you here? And I was like, because I have like a sex addiction problem here. You know what I mean? And I can't get a handle on it. And he goes, well, usually people come to see me after everything's blown up, when they got caught cheating on their wife, so they lost their career or whatever. So he's like, so why are you here? I was like, preventative maintenance. You know what I mean? I was like, I want to be able to not be a slave to this, you know? And he goes, well, what do you believe about God? And this is where I was like, well, yeah, I believe in God. And he's like, do you believe in Jesus? I said, yeah, because there's a time where I, started believing in Jesus. And he's like, well, what do you believe about Jesus' grace? And I said, I don't understand the question. Like, what do you mean? He's like, do you believe you're forgiven? I was like, yeah. He goes, I believe. And this was super offensive, and anybody who hears this is going to feel offended too, because this was wild. But he said,
"This is a wild statement, now, guys. Buckle up, boys and girls."
Yeah. He said, I believe that I could cheat on my wife every day for the rest of my life, and I'd still be saved by God's grace. And I was like, what? You know what I mean? I was like, I literally couldn't understand why he was saying it. Didn't make any sense to me. I only saw him that one time. Didn't go back after that because I couldn't afford it.
I probably wouldn't have remembered
after hearing that. You're like, what?
You're saying you could cheat on your wife? This sounds nuts.
I know, it sounds nuts. Yeah, he didn't say he was cheating, but he said he knows that he could.
Yeah.
And then and now I understand that now too. What he was trying to get me to understand was the depths of God's grace, because that's what really changed me. And it's so counterintuitive. Doesn't sound right, but that's what really changed me, is when I understood that I was safe in his promise. Like the scriptures say, I'm safe in his promise, and there's nobody can take me out of his hands. You know what I mean? And I went through every scripture I could find on salvation, by the way, over and over and over for years. You know what I mean? But once I really internalized that, I understand his message, because that safety comes, you lose that shame, and the shame is what keeps you enslaved, And so like, being enslaved, and I think this is probably something to do with AA and stuff too, or whatever, when they're like, they go through this process of the acceptance in the community, you know what I mean? Because that really does help. Like, it really actually changed me. Then the more I understood the gospel, the more in depth and the more beautiful I found it, and the more like I thought about it and stuff. And then I was like, that other stuff just kind of started falling off. You know what I mean? And so when I heard, I remember reading Galatians 5:16, where Paul says, keep in step with the Spirit, and you won't gratify the desires of the flesh. And that's when that made sense to me, because I said, it's not me trying to fight this, saying, instead of saying like I need to fight and combat this difficult problem. It became bigger and bigger, and the shame intensified. But instead, I was just keeping in step with the Spirit. And then I stopped gratifying the desires of the flesh. My heart started wanting other things. You know what I mean? I was like, I care way more about the gospel than I do hooking up with some girl. You know what I mean? Or something like that. And so, so the process was a long process. But, man, it just that's what really changed me. And so that's why I'm so big on the gospel message, too, and people understanding you're saved by grace through faith, not of works, because works is the kryptonite. And all of us have a tendency to want to impose our works to feel better than others or to feel like we're justified by God. I mean, there's all of these temptations we have around works. The human wants works. We can't understand grace in any other facet of life. We can't understand pure grace, And so, that's where things changed for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you're spot on in terms of the salvation by grace through faith. And I think even in that, you hearing that and it not making sense at the time.
Yeah.
And so where was this in the process where you hear this, and how old are you at this point where you hear this, and then from when then it actually hit you, and it was actually what unlocked the power for you to stop, living in this addiction that you had?
Really, it's like when I met my wife and we started dating and stuff. This is where I started getting into the gospel way more, and that's when things really changed for me.
Was she a Christian?
Yeah, she was too, but we were both kind of way more into the world, kind of a lot more. We didn't really fully submit, to God. And so the whole process was weird to me because I always heard growing up, you need to just submit to God, and this and that, where it was this purely you just got to grit your teeth and do it, But for what we kind of realized, as we started talking more and more about the gospel and really kind of understanding this stuff, for us, it was this is something that is good for us, makes sense, is better for you, you're happier, you know what I mean? You don't want to be, just like Paul talks about being a slave in Romans 6 and stuff like this, you don't want to be a slave to sin, you know what I mean? You've already been set free from that. You don't want to be a slave to sin, And so it started making sense, started thinking about this stuff. And then when I started my YouTube channel too, I started off doing way more of the apologetic stuff too. Then I started getting deeper into the gospel after that, you know what I mean? And thinking more and more about it even deeper. And this is where things really started to change for my life. So, yeah.
That's interesting, man.
Yeah.
And so the breakthrough comes after you kind of dive deep into the gospel.
Yeah.
But it's the understanding of grace that stirred you on to living holy.
Yeah, really was. You know what I mean? And
so that's I think that's a paradox for people.
Yeah, it is.
The grace, the gift, the I'm going to remove the shame. Now you're the righteousness of God.
Yeah.
Then actually caused or empowered, or I don't know how you would want to describe the works.
Yeah. That's when my works were actually good. You know what I mean? Better. I mean, my works are filthy rags, you know that. But that's where the works kind of kicked in, naturally at that point. That's why it's so counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense in some ways, you know what I mean? Super counterintuitive. But this is where I started understanding how God, where God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. You know what I mean? It makes more sense to me now because it's we can't do these things like we think we can. You know what I mean? So it's really I mean, all glory to God with that because I genuinely thought I was going to take this to the grave. I genuinely thought, I said, this is going to be my problem for life. And I was I don't want to be another one of those pastors or teachers or something shaming God's name, you know what I mean? Screwing up on another scandal, so, yeah.
And in terms of, was there a practical component on dealing with some of the sex addiction? I talk about, I take a course at my church called Men's Skills, accountability, fellowship, community groups. I could have a Christian therapist now that I see.
Yeah.
Maybe I talk to him once or twice a month. Was there a practical side to this that also helped?
Yeah. One thing too was me and my best friend, we talk every day. And so I could talk with him about whatever, and I know that I'm safe as well. So this is also the same thing, kind of like the gospel. You're safe. You start believing it. You know what I mean? And then start internalizing it. So having community, I think, is critical and crucial because we all feel like people can't understand our sins in some way. You know what I mean? It's nobody's going through this. I'm uniquely flawed. You know what I mean? But reality is people wrestle with stuff. And I started realizing everybody's just wrestling with something else. You know what I mean? And it's so that's why it's kind of weird to judge people off sin because like James says in James 1 too. You broke one, you broke them all in the law. You know what I mean? And so it's like, but we just think like somebody that struggles with homosexuality. You know what I mean? We're like, oh, we can judge that sin just because I have no temptation in that area. You know what I mean? But I'm thinking, that's what I thought about. I was like, what about my sexual sin? You know what I'm saying? Like, I was like, just because they're wrestling with same-sex attraction and I'm not, doesn't give me the ability to look down on them as if I'm better than them in some sense, or if I'm more holy than them in some sense. Like, I mean, sin is sin. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you get into the sexual morality side of it, it's definitely, maybe some of the consequences are different, the ramifications are different. If I'm looking at porn versus cheating on my wife, if you hooked up versus, you know what I mean, like I had a bunch of kids with random women, right? Like so the ramifications of it might be different, but I definitely think it all kind of goes into the same category of
when it comes to our standing before God.
Yes, yes, and I would also say us taking something that was intended as a blessing is the utility which God furthers the human species.
That's right.
Like he uses, so it's like this interesting blessing, pleasure, but how he continues on the human species and perverting that outside of God's design of it. It's all the same,
you know? It's all the same. Yeah, we all want to get our, let everything else be the source of our happiness and comfort and security than God. That's our tendency, you know what I mean? And so we get that through our ego, through whatever fixation. Everybody has these struggles too. People who don't think they have the struggles don't know themselves well enough. You know what I mean? And so really that's what it comes down to. Like, where are we not trusting God? You know what I mean? If we really knew, you know, the more we internalize the gospel, the more we know that we can trust them. And then that's what really changes us.
That's good, man. So here's how I think of it. And you could push back on this if you want, right? Like, I want my son to be obedient to me.
Yeah, 100%.
Yet he isn't always obedient to me. We have boys around the same age, they're hanging out now, right? And so they won't always be obedient. That doesn't change the fact that that's still my son.
Yes. So if you think about the adoption, right? We're adopted into God's family. Like, if your son wilds out, you know what I mean? So you I mean, I'm not sure if you have an adopted kid. I know
Lena's our niece is with us. Yes.
So figure, so it's like, if you adopt her, right? Like, if she's mean to you, if she doesn't follow your rules, she's still legally your child. You see what I'm saying? And so it's like, it's the same thing that happens too when we're talking about like penal substitution in the Bible and stuff like this. We're legally God's, you know what I mean? And so it's like, this is why in 1 John, John's talking about like, you're children of God, now act like it. You know what I mean? Don't act like children of Satan. You know what I mean? Act like it. You know what I mean? Because this is who you are. He's reminding them of their true nature. And that's one thing I saw over in the Bible too, is if you look, Paul's arguments tend to go, most of the books, is this is who you are, now act in accordance with it. He's not starting with saying, act good, act good, act good. He's reminding them of what God's done for them and who they are. Now act in accordance with it. But to get back to what you say about your son, if you think about that, it's like when your son's disobedient, would you rather him be obedient out of fear, you know what I mean? Or because he understands and loves and appreciates what you say and trusts you, you know what I mean? That's a much different relationship, not because he's afraid you're going to abandon him, you know what I mean, in that sense, but just because he loves you and you have that loving dynamic, because that's how I think it is a lot with God too, you know?
To be fair, sometimes I need obedience, but I don't care if you're afraid of me or you're loving me, right?
And they're kids too, you know what I mean? So and so I agree with that.
But fear isn't always the best motivator. Fear, you definitely would prefer that he would read the room, understand what's being asked, and do it instead of like, I have to. Scare. I raised my voice last night. We got home late and Lena was out, like she was tired, and he got really particular about like assembling his bed a specific way. So he like took his like little mat and put it on top, and it's like 7 blankets and pillows. And I'm like, bruh, it's 10 o'clock at night. Like, I'm tired. I've had a long day. Lena's tired. Your sister's tired. Everyone's tired. And he was just zoned in, bro. He's just like, well, I just gotta do one more thing. And I raised my voice, bro. And I yelled, and bro, he started crying. And I felt so. I mean, he was also tired.
That's happened to me too.
You know what I mean? He was also tired, so I know, like, okay, you're also tired.
Emotional,
but I'm like, dude, and so like I like, and then he like hid under the blankets and started crying. So like I had to pull him out, and I'm like, hey, like, you know, what you're doing right now is not okay. but I should not have raised my voice like that.
You're still safe with me.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Dad's tired.
Yeah.
That was not appropriate.
Yeah.
However, what you're doing is also not okay.
Right, yeah.
You know?
And you want them to fear the right things.
Yes.
That's inconsistent with reality.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I want them to fear touching a hot stove. You know what I mean? So you want it that way. But like threaten them their salvation based off of works.
Or I'm going to kick you out of the house, son.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. You're no longer, I mean, that to me is not the best motivator. You know
but
what I mean?
how much of people's theology is formed around that?
Yeah, a lot of the Armenian theology
You know?
is framed that way.
You mess up, you sin once, you're out.
Yeah, and see,
know?
I'm not a Calvinist or an Armenian, you know what I mean? But I understand how both of them can understand those positions. But I mean, it's such a slippery slope. And think about the subjective nature of works. It's like, okay, at what point do you lose your salvation? If you commit 1 sin, 20 sins, 100 sins, how much is habitual? You know what I mean? Is it like, you know, once a month, once a year, you know what I mean, or whatever? And then it's like, is it people because people will be like, oh, if it's habitual sin, then you'll lose your salvation. But at the same time, it's like, so it's okay for me to try a bunch of different sins, you know what I mean, but just not the same sin over and over. You know what I mean? It's all such a slippery, subjective slope anyway. Yeah. And I just don't believe that that's what the Bible teaches. Like that's my conviction. I mean, I plow through these passages, especially the most popular ones like James 2, Matthew 7. You know what I mean? You have a lot of these. Like I really look through them, and I'm just personally, I'm convinced that I don't think you can lose your salvation. Even though I'm not a Calvinist too, I just don't think you can lose your salvation.
Yeah, you're making a point to make sure you really drive home that you're not a Calvinist.
Well, people accuse me of being an Armenian and a Calvinist all the time in comments. You know what I mean? And I say that I just want to be a biblicist. You know what I mean? I want to be faithful to the Bible. Like I don't care about these camps. I'm not on a team or something like that. You know.
Have you looked at Leighton Flowers' provisionism?
I have, but I don't know much where his view differs from mine. I remember there was 1 or 2 points that I was like, I'm not sure I embrace that. Yeah. But most of it is similar to mine, I think.
Yeah, it sounds very similar. Okay. We can look at it later. But I've enjoyed, because I do feel like his kind of bridges the two. Yeah. And so he believes in original sin, but he also believes you can't lose your salvation. Okay. You know, and so it's a nice bridge. I don't remember the whole acronym, but I think it's pretty good. So let me ask you this: like we talked about this, and you're like, man, I'm not sure if I want to talk about like you know, all the women and the sex addiction and like. You still aren't super comfortable even having this conversation. Yeah. Why is that?
Yeah, because it's weird. Even though I know I've been forgiven by God's grace, you know what I mean? I'm not proud of it. You know what I mean? It's not something where I'm like, oh, this is dope. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, I hooked up with all these girls. You know what I mean? Like, my body count's way high. Like, I'm not proud of it, and I don't think it's something that should be glorified. You know what I mean? I don't want people to think like, if they hear what I'm saying, they're like, oh yeah, Jon did it and he's cool. Look at him now. So therefore I can live like this for a long time. Like I don't advise it. Like I think it's messed me up psychologically in ways, and with bonding and stuff, which I did the video on too, with the science and stuff with bonding.
In terms of pair bonding and stuff like that?
Yes, in the neuroscience. So it's like when you're releasing the oxytocin and the vasopressin and all this, like, and you're breaking these connections all the time, it's harder for you to form deep bonds. You know what I mean? Because I think my relationship with my wife would be way better had I not, you know what I mean, indulged in hooking up with so many different girls, you know, because, and so this is the consequences of sin. You know what I mean? You're saved from the condemnation of your sin, but not the consequences. You know what I mean? So
and they've done studies, and I don't know if we're referencing the same ones, but they have found that the more partners you have, the harder it is to bond. Yeah. But it's a little more true for women. There's something about that the physiology that like it's a little more true for. Yeah. So a man can have, you know, a higher body count than his spouse, and it not be as hard. But if a woman has a really high body count, it's because for women, they have sex to express emotion. It's an emotional connection, where men can just plow through anything, and it's less of an emotional connection.
Of it, and I think
but it's still
probably
there.
The oxytocin.
It's the oxytocin.
Yeah, because they release more oxytocin. Men, from what I remember, they release more vasopressin for the bonding. So that's probably what it is, because that same chemical is released when they breastfeed. You know what I mean, and when they're nurturing and stuff like that. So
and they say. Yeah, it could become more difficult to do that for women. And once a woman can have sex without emotion, that's like a really dangerous place. And men, I feel like fairly early on can have sex without it. My first time losing my virginity, I had no emotional connection. I mean, I'm ashamed for saying like I wasn't the least physically attracted to the girl. I lost my virginity to. The girl I dated in high school, I wasn't super duper attracted to her.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? So it could be just straight like,
yeah,
it's kind of whack if you think about it as a guy,
it is.
That you can just like,
yeah, I get that.
Yeah. So, but you, so there's a degree of like, you're still working through this stuff.
Yeah. I don't, I haven't really talked about it before because like, it's just that kind of part of my past. Like I wanted to be gone, you know what I mean? Basically, especially now, like my mindset now, when I think about marriage, like having an incredible wife who loves and accepts me, you know what I mean? Doing that, and then like what sex is in our marriage, you know what I mean, compared to what it was in the past with all these girls, it's like not even close to the same ballpark.
I think men miss how important the quality is different in a monogamous, stable, healthy, protected marriage. Like the quality is way better than any porn, is way better than any hookup. It's totally different.
Yeah, and an area of kind of more shame or something like that is with a lot of these girls, like I always felt like as soon as they got to know the real me, like they'd be out. You know what I'm saying? It's like, because like, okay, they're down to hook up with me or whatever, but like the more time I spend with them or whatever, they got to know the real me, they're out. But like with my wife, like she loves me, you know what I mean? And she likes who I am, you know what I mean? And so like, and she's there. And so it's weird because I had a hard time juggling like the friends with a sexual interest or whatever in the past. But now it's like my wife is like my best friend. And like incredibly sexually attracted to her. We have good chemistry, like, and it's not just about physical stuff. Like it's really like a bonding, like a renewal of the covenant per se. You know what I mean? And so it's like it's a beautiful experience. It's way different.
And it gets better with time.
It does.
And you don't quite understand that until I've been married. It'll be 15 years this coming July. It definitely every year it gets better. And it reminds me of everything you said. It reminds me of a Wilt Chamberlain quote. He said it, I think, on like a late night show.
I can remember it.
And he said, man, I've been with 1,000 women, but I'd rather be with one woman 1,000 times.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, that's so good.
Yeah.
But is that not God's design for how we are to pair bond?
Yes, and people don't understand that too, because we all think that our own natural way is better and we're going to be happier, but it is just not. You know what I mean? Like it's weird because now I get it, because it's weird even when I'm thinking back to how I was, you know what I mean? Like even going back like 5-10 years or whatever, like just a way different mindset today, you know what I mean, than I had then. And it's just like, man, I have such a different perspective on this. I can't believe I thought it was cool to just like hook up with these different girls. It's just not cool. It's not helpful. It's bad for you, you know what I mean? Like, and all not to mention like the risk of STDs and pregnancies and all kinds of stuff. It's just not what's up, you know?
Yeah. What do you make of, I would say, the evolution of some of the hookup stuff in the modern red pill community, whether it's Fresh and Fit, whether it's, Andrew Tate, whether it's like, it's okay for guys to rack up high body counts, but women are different. Like it's some of that stuff. And again, there's some science to that. Like there's a little bit of science to that, but generally speaking, like how do you view that world now? Because it is the continuation of the hookup stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, the pickup stuff, the pickup artist.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Honestly, it's so similar that a lot of the time I have a hard time telling what's new and what's not, because it's so similar, but I just think like, I think I just feel bad for them, because I think what they're missing is honestly like what we experience now, me and you know what I mean? It's like, we know that difference. Like, you know what I mean? It's not what it's cracked up to be, like, because it doesn't stop. Like, I just remember thinking like I was saying earlier, I'll hit a certain point where like, okay, now I've had enough of these different girls, of these different body types, of these different ethnicities and all this. But it doesn't. Like, it just leaves you more and more empty, because you realize how disappointing it is. It's like you're just left kind of more empty after it all. You know what I mean? And then you just feel like, okay, like I feel kind of used, and like, you know what I mean? It's like, I can't really connect with these girls. You know what I mean? So like, what is it? It takes out the humanity. You don't have that deep, like, loving commitment. That's what makes things way better too, is just like having that, like really having a marital commitment, like a genuine one.
I've read different studies about this, and some studies say that like 20% of men are getting with 80% of the women, right? That's some of the red pill stuff.
Hearing that,
And then as I looked at it more, and this is more so like about these women that were hooking up with you.
Yeah.
What they're finding is that it's not 20% of men are getting with 80% of the women. It's that the top 20% of men and the top 20% of women are having the most amount of sex with each other.
Oh, interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, do you think in hindsight these women were just women that were just down for, like, they too had high body counts?
Oh, I mean, a lot of them, of
Yeah.
course. You know what I mean? Like, because I mean, like, yeah, a lot of them, of course. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And because I think that's kind of like the culture we were kind of like
The
indoctrinated into.
sex positivity and all that.
Yeah, you know, and so it's like, oh, it's cool to just hook up with strangers, you know what I mean, have a good time, you know what I mean. But I realized like we're not just that would make sense if we were just physical beings, you know what I mean, like we're like animals or something like that. But like it's like rape is not assault, you know what I mean. It's deeper than just assault. You're not just hurting someone's body because of this intertwining of the spirit with sex, you know what I mean. And so because of that, like there are these ramifications that are more serious, because you know it's like how Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians when he talks about when you go into the temple of a prostitute, you bring the Lord in there with you because of the spiritual aspect as well. So yeah.
Interesting, man. Yeah, and these conversations I think are, you know, they're relevant, they're important, they're being had in the world, and the church isn't talking about it, in my opinion, as often as we should talk about it. So that's why I was like, man, you got to share some of this, because you sit in a unique vantage point where a lot of Christian men aren't in that quote unquote top 20% of men that are just, you know what I mean, having access. You talking about ethnicities and body types, you know what I'm saying? Like you had options, you know, most men haven't, but you've gone where most men haven't gone, and you're like, nah, this ain't it.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, because like one of my friends was like, and he's a Christian dude, but he like wrestles with like porn and stuff like that or whatever. But he was saying like he like felt like jealous of my past, and that's what kind of made me. It's like I don't want people to feel that way, because I'm like, trust me, like I'm not just saying this to cap or to sound cool or nothing like that. Like it is not what's up. Like like people say this, you're like, oh yeah, right. Like I'd be happy hooking up with like, you know, a whole bunch of different girls or whatever. But I'm telling you, like it doesn't give you anything, because at the end of the day, it's like what do you gain from that? An ego kick, but then you need more girls for your ego kick, and then after you have a lot of girls, it's just like what else is going to stimulate that ego? You know what I mean? And it doesn't help you. That ego is not something that stands there. You know what I mean? Because one day you're not going to look as good as you look now. You know what I mean? Period. You're not. You know what I mean? And so like it's not a good place to be, because your foundation's on shaky grounds and you're a slave to it. Being a slave to it, like really a slave to it. It's not what's up.
Man, what a powerful story, man, that I think you're willing to share. And I think a lot, God willing, men hear this and are like, man, that's not what's up. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like that's not what's up. Do you got any final words, final thoughts before we wrap?
Not really. I mean, I just want to encourage people, like if you're wrestling with something like this, I get it. You know what I mean? And it doesn't mean that you're not saved if you're wrestling, you know what I mean? But God wants what's best for you, you know what I mean? And the Spirit, you know what I mean? When God's Spirit lives in you too, is like he wants what's best for you, you know what I mean? So yielding to the Spirit, you keep in step with the Spirit, keep thinking about the gospel message, what it means for you. And then for me, at least, like that helps. And you will need some healthy boundaries depending on what kind of position you're in, you know what I mean? But really like let your focus be on not fixing yourself, but really like understanding and going deeper with the gospel message. And I believe things start kind of working out after that point.
So next time you hear one of these goobers tell you that having a high body count is what's up, what are you going to say?
What do you mean?